always wondered something, and it kind of puzzles me. So I'm watching these comments on a YouTube channel in regards to a scene from Dune. Not necessarily a scene, but like a tribute video for the starter car. And it's led to this conversation with this guy who believes that the whole sword fighting edict of the movie doesn't make any sense. And he claims to have read the book where the concept of shields and everything are very much explained. But he clearly also hasn't. So I think if you've read the books and seen the movie, the adaptation of the combat may not be what you picture. That's the problem with any kind of adaptation from a book to a movie or a television program. There's always that chance of it not being what you picture, but like, how do you not picture blade combat? Anyways, there's my little preamble of non-MMA stuff. And kind of highlights two moments of confusion when it comes to MMA fans. And I think it's a small portion of MMA fans in both cases. So I don't think this is a generally held idea or commonly held idea. But two events from this weekend's MMA cards have me scratching my head and finding our fandom, I don't want to say a little sad or a little maybe crude is the right word. Anyway, let's just get into this. I'm going to cover the UFC fight card, Lemos versus Andrade, along with Bellator 278 and 279. I did pretty poorly on the UFC card in regard to predictions. If I look this up real quick and do a little quick math, I went 0-4 to start the card. 1-5, 2-5, 2-6, 3-6, 3-7, 4-7. So not great. Now, mind you, I'm going to say that one of the losses I took, that being Charles Jourdain and Lando Venata, I think my breakdown was pretty spot on. I think the fight was headed in a direction that I called for. And then we got a guillotine choke finish. So it's a bit of a weird one that I kind of feel like I won a little bit more than I lost. But the rest were solid. And the Mike Jackson Dean Barry thing, I don't think anyone won. Unless you picked Mike Jackson by DQ, I don't think anyone won that fight. But I did win money off of it, so that's nice because he was a ridiculous underdog. So let's talk about that fight first, because I think I have, of all the fights, the most to say about that. And, this will space out the rants a little bit, because the rant that'll come later is the Bellator rant. So the fight itself, Dean Barry versus Mike Jackson. Mike Jackson is not a full-time fighter. This is his third pro fight. He fought CM Punk and Mickey Gall before this. He does have some kickboxing record, not overly well documented, but supposedly some. And Barry's out there and he is winning the fight. He is landing the better shots. Jackson's not getting a lot of offense in. But it has to also be said, two things. One, remember that I said Jackson's not a full-time fighter. There were a couple of moments where he made Barry look just silly with fairly basic defensive technique and striking. And Barry looked like he was getting tired. It honestly would not have surprised me if Barry won the first two rounds and then got submitted in the third round or something. That really feels like that's where we were going. Which all told just continues this whole thing of, why did this fight happen? Why is Mike Jackson getting booked after Dana White said he would never book him again? And why is Dean Barry signed to a contract? Don't understand it. He's 4-1. He's quite sloppy. He's very predictable. It's the same combinations kind of over and over again. And a lot of people were giving him credit like, oh, he's got nice combinations. No. He has one combination that he spams over and over and over and over and over again. There's no variation or anything, and he's winding up way too much, putting way too much power on it, and he's going to tire himself out. I'm not looking forward to this guy's next fight. And then there's the fouls. He had a pretty understandable low blow. He got warned for fingers. Sort of understandable again. And then he spin kicked Mike Jackson in the junk. And then he very clearly eye raked him and eye gouged him. And this all happened in 3 minutes and 52 seconds of fight time. It was pretty bad. It was pretty terrible. I hope to see neither guy fight. And here comes the weird thing is that there are a lot of people saying Mike Jackson took the easy way out. And obviously Dean Barry is at the top of that list. And here's the thing. Dean Barry saying whatever makes all the sense because there's a certain level of detachment from reality that all UFC fighters have because, let's face it, after you've been knocked out the second or third time, coming back for more suggests some level of not really being with the program in terms of being attuned to the reality the rest of us shared. Or the rest of us share, I should say. So that's not surprising. What is surprising is a relatively small section of the fan base, but like a solid section of the fan base, are backing this up. They're angry at Mike Jackson for taking the DQ win. And their logic is that he could have continued and that the fouls were accidental and not intentional. On the former, I do believe Mike Jackson could have continued, but I also don't believe Dean Barry deserved to have a chance to get back in that fight. He was at, what, a foul per minute? That's fairly insane. Additionally, on the intentionality of the fouls or whatever, let's be honest here. Particularly the eye gouge was very, very concerning because either you were trying to eye gouge him or you have no control over your extremities and should not be licensed to fight. Like, that's the thing that to me stood out the most, is that if this was indeed unintentional fouling, as the claim is, then he is even worse than I think he is. That he has no control, that he is dangerous and should not be allowed to fight. It's the worst kind of danger too. And I know someone's going to say, Mike, this is MMA. It's dangerous. It's supposed to be dangerous. The problem is that it's supposed to be dangerous within a set of rules. And one of those rules is no eye gouging. And I encourage you, if you really do believe that Mike Jackson is in the wrong for not continuing this fight, to rewatch that and realize just how bad that eye gouge is. That was fairly one of a kind. Yet there is a camp that is advocating for Barry. I don't understand it. I don't know why he's signed to a contract. I assume it has something to do with Conor McGregor just because he is SBG. He is Irish. It is how Artem Lobov got signed. And to be honest, I don't even want to put this guy in the same category as Artem Lobov because Lobov just had a bad-looking record. Otherwise, he was a relatively fine fighter. Good power in his hands, scrappy, grappling limited, but still, a guy who shouldn't be long for the UFC, but had he been more selective in his opponents, could have come into the UFC with like a 10-2 or a 10-3 record, and we wouldn't have batted an eye. Whereas Barry, the moment he gets in there, his incompetency is just really, really obvious. And I don't understand why anyone would take this guy's side. Let's go back to the top of the card. Let's go back to happier times, more elite fighters. Jessica Andrade returned to strawweight. Made short work of Amanda Lemos. She was having problems at range, which is not unusual for her. She's a relatively short breach challenged fighter. Never has had the greatest setback and strike skills, the deepest skill set in that regard. And Lemos was, getting some good work done. But once Andrade was like, okay, enough of this. I'm going to go forward. I'm going to impose my physicality on you. She got the arm triangle and scored a standing arm triangle choke for the victory. And I got a little bit of flack for like underselling Lemos's physicality because in my predictions, I really didn't go through too much about how physical she is, because it just doesn't matter when you're fighting Andrade. At strawweight, Andrade is a monster. At flyweight, Andrade is a monster. At bantamweight, Andrade is actually still a force. Like, we forget this. She came into the UFC fighting at bantamweight and actually wasn't bad. Wasn't physically outmatched. I do want to quickly go over her early record just to kind of reinforce this idea. So beat Milana Dudieva, now Bellator chip Liz Carmouche beat her, but then she beat Rosie Sexton, Raquel Pennington, Larissa Pachenko. She actually had a fairly good fight going against Marion Renault until getting submitted. Sarah Morris lost to Rocky Pennington. I mean, it's pretty good. She's not like physically outmatched by much. 2 weight classes above anywhere she should be thinking about fighting. And that's why I didn't really go through Lemos' physicality, because if you're weighted victory against Jessica Andrade's physicality, you're going to lose unless it's bantamweight. Or unless you're Valentina Shevchenko, who is a similar absolute destroyer of worlds. But in Shevchenko's case, it was more of technique that got her the win there. What's next for Andrade? I don't know. The strawweight title picture is for the women's divisions probably the most complicated. I mean, obviously we got Rose defending against Carlos Barza. You got Mackenzie Dern, who they want to push. You've got Marion Rodriguez, who's kind of waiting for a title shot as well. Plus the former champs, Weili Zhang and Yonan Jacek and Jessica Andrade. Zhang is fighting against Yan Jacek, so the two most appealing fights for Andrade are off the table. I could see her versus Marion Rodriguez being pretty fun. I guess that's what you do. Because I don't think they'll give her Mackenzie Dern. Someone suggested that Dern and her made sense. And I agree, but I also think the UFC wants to push Dern. And I don't really think anyone is liking Dern's chances against Andrade. That could just be me. I don't know. But I'm going to say the Rodriguez fight has a lot of intrigue. And Rodriguez has nowhere near the same strength, but she does have ridiculous punching power. And she's very long. So she could exploit the aforementioned weaknesses at range that Andrade does have. And she's not someone who is going to be terribly keen to clinch with Andrade, and has, as of the Mackenzie Dern fight anyways, finally started to learn to avoid the clinch, which is good. So it's interesting. It's a fight that I would pick Andrade in, but I think it would be really fun. Claudio Puelles got a knee bar over Clay Guida. I don't have a lot to say about this fight. I still find myself not being the biggest believer in Puelles. He's gotten a bunch of knee bars in the UFC, and obviously some weird submissions there, and it's fun. But he's also largely getting them against fighters who are going to willingly grapple with him and have their own significant problems in terms of how they are constructed. Because he was losing the fight to Felipe Silva, which was his first knee bar. And then the Chris Grutzmacher fight. Grutzmacher is kind of low end on the physicality spectrum, like probably the bottom of the physicality spectrum for 155. And now Guida, who's A guy that I picked here because normally he only really throws himself into chokes, but I also do realize that he also throws himself into leg locks and armbar positions. It's not necessarily been the way people have finished him. So I should have gone with Claudio. But I still don't know what to make of him. Like there's still he's an interesting guy. Speaks really, really well. Obviously has very opportunistic grappling, but his stand-up is still not put together all that well, and it's not like he has a dominant wrestling game that is going to guarantee that he gets to grapple with people. So I don't really know. He's kind of the one fighter that I find very puzzling coming off of this card. That won. There are some people who lost we're going to get to that are a little puzzling, but I don't really know. I don't know. I don't really know what to do with them. Macy Barber beat Montana De La Rosa. Now, I am going to say, like, this was a good performance from Barber. It was a weird performance for De La Rosa because I understand what she was going for because Barber is notoriously bad at finding her range. Like, very bad at it. She starts striking with you from, like, 8 feet away and then slowly, like, gets in range. So, like, the idea of, like, standing back and trying to be the taller, longer fighter definitely has some merit to it. It's just De La Rosa lacks the physical tools and the comfort level to really make that work. So, in the end, it looked weird, even if, tactically speaking, it did make a lot of sense. And Barber was just too physical for her, which is the thing that always is there. She's with Team Alpha Male now. I don't think I knew that, stunningly enough. I still don't. I feel better about her training situation because previously she was training with her dad at like Fort Collins MMA or something like that. I think that was the name of the gym. And this is a step up, obviously. Team Alpha Male is a good gym, despite the fact that I do trash talk them a fair bit. I just think that they're also a gym that is very, very, very narrow in the type of fighters it puts out. And I don't think that Barber fits their mold that well, but it would still be better than what she was becoming beforehand. So she gets a valuable win here. This being said, I think the commentary and some of the Twitter reaction was not on par with the actual performance because they were hyping this up very, very big. And maybe this is just me having picked Barber and seeing the physical discrepancies between Barber and De La Rosa and just going, this is not really the biggest test for her. And again, the fact that De La Rosa doesn't really have a skill set that is going to exploit the weaknesses in Barber's game, even though she tried to, is it just doesn't wow me. But it's good to see her win after a 3-fight losing skid. It's good to see a little bit of humbleness to her because after the Miranda Maverick fight and after the Roxanne Rafari fight in particular, and also the Grasso fight, she became kind of unbearable. And it looks like she's come back to earth just a little bit. That would be good. I'm not sure who I want to see her fight next because I honestly kind of just want to see her not fight for a little bit and continue to fix some of the problems with her game and develop a more defined style. She holds the number 12 ranking according to Tapology. I should actually use the UFC rankings for this, but Tapology goes further down is kind of the thing. So let's see here. Rankings, women's flyweight, please. Is she on here? They have her at 14 on the UFC. It's above Erin Blanchfield. I think that would be a rude awakening fight. And behind Casey O'Neill. I guess you could do Casey O'Neill. Still don't fully know what I make of Casey O'Neill. Or Jessica Ai. Maybe. See how she does against someone who admittedly does have, like, for as aimless as I is, like a fairly good power physicality game. Let's do that, yeah. Barber versus Jessica Ai. Make that happen. That could be fun. That could be fun. Not really. But it could be enlightening. It could be illuminating. There we go. That's the word I want to use. Charles Jourdain did guillotine Lando Venata. Venata, I thought, was winning the outside exchanges. He got the early wrestling advantage, but he is always susceptible to getting caught when he enters the pocket because his way of transitioning from outside to inside is just kind of reckless. It's kind of defensively deficient. Jourdain caught him and then caught him on the ground with the choke and got the job done. Called out Edson Barboza afterwards, said he wouldn't take him down. I'm fine with that fight. I'm absolutely fine with that fight. Might as well make it happen. Like, anyone who's going to stand with Edson Barboza is a fun night at the office. I think it's a bad idea. I think Jourdain's going to lose if he only kickboxes with Barboza. But Barboza has also been not terribly convincing at 145. It just seems like without his speed advantage that he had at 155, or at least a lesser version of that speed advantage, his striking game isn't nearly as fierce, but I do think it is better than Charles Jourdain's. That being said, I also thought Groovy Lando would outstrike him, but I also did see this potentiality. There are just some massive defensive holes in Groovy Lando's game that he hasn't had any interest in fixing, and I just assume he never really will. So he's in the mold of, I don't think he's ever going to live up to his potential, so just keep putting him in fun fights, and that's about it. He's got some name value, so you can puff up cards with him. Pretty much anything you put him in is going to be somewhat interesting, so he'll hang around and keep doing his thing. As for Montana De La Rosa, Clay Guida, Lemos, I don't overly know what I would do with any of them. In the case of De La Rosa, you'd have to go to the Tapology rankings as opposed to the UFC rankings. She's not on there. They've got her at 19. I'm looking to see if anyone's coming off a loss that's kind of in that same ballpark. Maybe Jillian Robertson makes sense if that's a fight that hasn't happened. I feel like that is a fight that might have actually happened. No, it has not. So, sure, why not that? For Lemos, she was talking about retirement for a while, so I don't know. Like, this could trigger that retirement, and we'll see. But she's also interesting against just about anyone at strawweight. Strawweight is throw any two in there, and it's probably going to be reasonably fun. So there's not really a lot to break down there. And for Guida, I've been saying it for probably the better part of a decade. Retirement. honestly feels like it should be the thing. Like, when did I start thinking this? I guess it's not been that long. It's not been super long since I started finding him kind of sad to watch fight. I don't know. There's something in the tank, I guess. I don't know. I don't feel terrible watching him fight, but at the same time, I just don't think he's going to beat anyone that's particularly well put together as a fighter. No disrespect to Michael Johnson, because Michael Johnson always had the potential to be a good fighter, but serious problems. Confusing performance from Jordan Wright. He went from being an outside striker with like good creativity and like deep discomfort to like pressing the issue and looking deeply discomfortable about it and trying to wrestle while clearly not really knowing how to wrestle, despite having Vladimir Matyushenko as a coach, I do believe, and got guillotined by Marc-Andre Barrio. I'm not going to say this fight went like I thought it would, because I didn't think that Jordan Wright would try to impose Barrio's game on Barrio. But I'm still taking credit for the fact that I said that there would be significant problems in the clinch and with comfort for Jordan Wright, and there was. Even if he ended up being the aggressor that put himself in those positions, those were the positions I thought Barrio would win, and he did. I can't remember if Barrio had a call out. I know he talked about wanting to fight in Canada or wanting to fight in France, which is not happening. He is coming off the loss of Chidi Njokuani before this. What kind of fun middleweight stuff could we do with Marc-Andre Barrio? sure that there's going to be like a super strong one. He's kind of a fighter that I'm pretty happy to watch him fight just about anybody, if I'm, to be honest. They've got him at 39. He's a little bit behind Armin Petrosian. Could be fun. Could be fun. I'll throw that out there as an idea, because you can't really go much higher because he lost to Injukwani. But it'd be a fun fight. It would test Petrosian in some ways as well, which is good. For Jordan Wright, I don't know. Jordan Wright is a fighter that has to figure himself out, and honestly, I've always said this. Anytime I see a fighter who looks just absolutely uncomfortable in almost every aspect of the fight, I just think they should retire, because the money is not worth it. I don't know what the motive is. Like, it's the Jamie Pickett syndrome, basically, where when Jamie Pickett showed up in the UFC, I'm just like, all right, here's this guy with like some interesting physical tools and whatever. And then you watch him fight, and I'm like, he is horribly afraid of everything. Why is he fighting? Why is he not doing something else athletic or anything really for a living? I don't know. Sergey Kandojo, Dwight Grant went out there and had a real fun fight. I appreciate that Dwight Grant's trying to reestablish himself as something other than a low output counter striker. But I do actually think that fighting to form would have been a better idea here, and that's why I picked him. So, at the same time, while I appreciate him trying new things, because he does have to try new things, I think his style probably should have been the classic Dwight Grant here. But it was a super fun fight, and Kandojo called out somebody. I don't recall whom, but just put him in there with anyone who wants to kickbox with him, and you're in for a fun time. Tyson Pedro destroyed Ike Villaneva. Saw that coming. Villaneva is just not UFC caliber. He's got a good chin, but like to the body and to the legs, he seems kind of soft. He doesn't really have a threatening skill set anywhere. And that's a recipe for getting cut at some point. What's he on right now? He's 18-14. It's a 3-fight losing skid, none of which have looked particularly good, because he lost to Marcin Prachnio, who we're going to talk about in a little bit in a losing effort, Nick Mariano, and now Tyson Pedro. He's just not good enough. Like I feel bad saying that. I always do, but it doesn't change that I'm not really sure who in the division I would pick him to beat. And that largely is why he needs to probably be shown the door. Yorichi Lang looks really good at bantamweight. He destroyed Cameron Else. I did pick Cameron Else. Not really off of any thoughts of Else being a particularly good fighter. I think he's going to be out of the UFC before long. But I just didn't really like what I saw from Yorichi Lang at flyweight. He seemed to have a very physical, reliant style, and going up in weight class usually doesn't work. Turns out that not cutting an extra 10 pounds, it just means he's got more energy and more feels better, I guess. So the weight class move, I think, is really good for him, and he got the job done here. Not sure where to go with him, because, I mean, the problem with beating Cameron Else is not very good. And it doesn't tell us that much, other than 135 doesn't appear to be a mistake. So put him against whatever you want. I immediately regretted my pick here between Evan Elder and Preston Parsons as soon as I saw them side by side. And I'm like, Parsons is huge. I always forget that Daniel Rodriguez is a really big fighter. So when Parsons debuted against him, it didn't really click with me how amply sized he is for the welterweight division. People were saying that all Elder has to do is go down to 155, and I'm not sure that's the case. I think there was a lot of problems with his defense, both on the feet and on the ground. Like, you can't get caught in an arm triangle that many times. I think it was like 6 times. And Parsons was just kind of lighting him up. He's he's uncomfortable in boxing exchanges, and until that changes, I'm not really sure that Evan Elder is actually going to be a particularly good fighter. He has a takedown game, so he can possibly win fights. He does have good hustle. He does have survivability. He does have toughness. But normally when like one of the top 5 things I have to say about a fighter is they're tough, that means they're just not very good either. And I don't know. I'm not saying cut him or anything, but it does feel like he has a hard ceiling. And, maybe he'll find his way around it. I'm not remotely certain where Parsons is on the Tapology rankings. I know the Tapology rankings have nothing to do with UFC matchmaking, but I do kind of like to use them as a guide towards who should fight who next, because it's the best I have. The UFC's ratings are, 1, kind of garbage, and 2, unless you're dealing with a fairly high-ranking fighter, they're not there. And yeah, Parsons is unranked as far as the UFC is concerned. I don't know. There's not really anyone around him that... Ismail Nardiev is kind of close to him on the Tapology rankings, and not a fight that I thought I would like, but I kind of do now. Nardiev's a pretty physical guy. Oh, Nardiev's been cut. They cut him after he lost to Sean Brady? Dudes, my guys, he was 2-2, and granted, the loss to Chance Renkartar was not very good. Anyways, bring back Ismail Nardiev and have him fight Preston Parsons. There you go. That's my call out for the UFC. Then further on down, we had Felipe Lins defeat Marcin Prachnio. Lins looked good at 205. That's kind of really that is the takeaway from this. He looks appropriately sized. Didn't look like he overcut weight. Doesn't look like he's too slow either. He capped up with Prachnio, who's a reasonably fast 205er. Tired him out with like grappling and so on. Did get a little tired at the end himself, but I like the move in general. And really the only reason I wasn't confident in Lins is just that he'd been out for a while and had a bunch of injuries. So I'm excited to see what he does next. And the only thing is also Prachnio is so defensively deficient. He's got some serious problems with his technical defense for both striking and for wrestling. And in that regard, I guess in a nutshell, I want to see Lins against someone with some striking and wrestling game at the same time. That would be the place to go. Whoever fits that mold. But it was a pretty reasonable card, I will say. There wasn't a particularly boring fight on the card. Now the latter stages of Lins Prachnio got boring when they gassed out, but Parsons Elder was good, Richie Lang was good, Tyson Pedro was quick, Candocho Grant was a very good fight, Barrio and Jordan were nice and quick as well. Barber De La Rosa wasn't like super thrilling, but it was fine. Wells was quick. Andrade was quick. I mean, it's a fight. It's a fight night card. It went quick, and that's kind of all you can really ask for, I guess, in the end of the day. And we'll move on to Bellator with that. All right, Bellator 278. Not a lot of fights to talk about here. There was a lot of filler on this card. Danny Cepatello beat Jornel Lugo. He's not super exciting. I mean, he's very much a takedown artist, Cepatello. He's going on to the tournament, I guess, to fight Leandro Higo, which does interest me a little bit because Higo's got a way better off his back game than anything that Cepatello has fought, in my opinion. I should probably take a quick perusal of Cepatello's record here. And Brett Johns has a game off his back, but it's not a particularly great one. It's got some interesting leg locks and stuff. There's stuff there, but it's not particularly amazing. And yeah, I mean, the Higo fight will tell us a little bit. I guess if Higo's going to fight anyone in the tournament, that's kind of the fight that I want to see. Higo doesn't really feel like a particularly fitting part of the bantamweight tournament, but it'll be interesting to see a guy who can hustle, can grapple, and is pretty opportunistic fight Sabatello and see how tight Sabatello's defensive grappling is and how far he can go. And Enrique Barzola defeated Nikita Mikhailov for the other spot in the tournament. By the way, what is with this bracket? Because you got Archuleta and Stotts, probably the two biggest homegrown talents that Bellator's got in this tournament. You've got Horiguchi, who's your big rising talent, and Patchy Mix fighting each other. That's, another one of your big homegrown talents. And that leaves you with Magomedov versus Barzola and Higo versus Sabatello. What's the deal with that? Like, it feels like the 4 guys you want in the final 4 are fighting each other at the final 8. It's kind of poor matchmaking, if I'm being honest. It did generate 2 good fights. I'm going to talk about them in a sec because they happen in Bellator 279. But what gives? I guess is what I'm getting at. Barzola just continues to show that, like, dude probably should never have been cut from the UFC. He's got great hustle, great scrap. He does everything pretty well, actually. He's fairly creative, fairly deep technical skills everywhere. Doesn't have the greatest physicality, but, like, he's not unathletic. And I never really understood why he got the axe. He's from a market that they are continuously trying to break into because they do not have a lot of Peruvian stars or anything like that. But I don't know. Like, I guess losing to Movsar Evelev and drawing with Ronnie Yaya is a death sentence. I don't agree that it should be, but I guess it is. Liz Carmouche and Juliana Velasquez was the main event. There's some controversy on the stoppage here. I thought it was a good stoppage. I mean, the rules state that you have to be intelligently defending yourself. And the way that Velasquez was pinned to the ground, eating short elbows, she was not defending herself in an intelligent manner. So I think it's perfectly fine to stop it. I will say Beltran's dive in there was a little bit over dramatic. Like, he wasn't saving her from life-altering injuries or anything like that. Carmouche's statement that she could break her orbital from that spot or whatever. Not with elbows that short. Let's not oversell it. But she had her pinned. She was doing damage. And there wasn't really any defense. So 100% good stoppage. Or 100% understandable, defensible stoppage. And Liz Carmouche is your new champion. Now, do I expect her to retain it for very long? I don't know. The flyweight division is not exactly buzzing with tremendous talent. It probably will end up down the road with Velasquez just getting a rematch, and she could win that or she could not. I thought she was winning here. But I don't know if she's winning by a large enough margin to feel like absolutely convinced that she's going to get that belt back. But I think we'll see more of that matchup, and I'm not super excited for it, but I'm not horrified by it. On to Bellator 279, Lance Gibson Jr. defeated Nainoa Dung, I think is how you say his name. Not surprised. The setup fight. Moving on. Justin Gonzalez defeated Kai Kamaka III. Now, this fight does worry me. It was incredibly close. Honestly, if you scored this for Kamaka, no problem. If you scored this for Gonzalez, no problem. I'm fine either way. But it does show a thing where, like, Kamaka grew up fighting at 135 or fighting at 145 against people who belonged at 135. And having a physical edge in the clinch that led to, honestly, just not developing necessarily the best danger sense in that regard. We saw that in his later UFC run, and we saw that again here, not today, but 2 days ago, where Gonzalez would start to herd him into a more power-based exchange, and he just wouldn't leave it. Like, he would He would embrace that as a option that he could win. And he really couldn't. He needed to stick to the outside and kind of play a speed, long range game, and he didn't. It's the problem with him moving up to featherweight is I don't necessarily think the division is a terrible fit for him physically. I just think he also has a bully mentality, not in the front runner sense, but in the confident sense of, you want to get close to me. Okay, that's fine. I'll handle that. I'll make that my zone. I'll use that to my advantage. And I don't think he can at the weight. And it's a shame because I do really like Kai Kamaka. I like watching him fight. Diana Silva won. Bobby King won. These are not terribly relevant fights. Go to Yamuchi. Got an armbar in his debut at welterweight. I got mixed feelings about him going up to welterweight. It does feel like a weight class too large for him. But at the same time, like, his whole game is kind of like super tricky, like striking into takedowns, into submissions, or making you take him down and then submitting you. So I think he'll actually do quite fine. I think his ceiling at 155 and 170 are very similar if you can just kind of blow him out of the water in the power, strength, athletic physicality departments. You could probably beat him, and there's a bunch of guys at both weight classes that will likely do that. So I guess it's not a problem, even though at 5'10", not particularly thickly built, it does seem like 155 should be doable, but he could totally lose a fight like he did to Michael Chandler and Dan Moret at 155 or 170. I don't think that there's a particularly big difference between the two as far as he's concerned. Then we had Yancy Madeiros versus Emmanuel Sanchez. This was a good fight. This was a very good fight. I enjoyed it. I expected it to be. Madeiros is the all kinds of brawling, defensively deficient, super tough, super physical fighter that really can go out there and have a barn burner with just about anyone. Sanchez's problem at 155 is he doesn't possess the ability to really hurt people. At 145, a big part of his game was being able to hurt people with counters and showing off like pretty good power for the weight class, and it's just not there at 155. Or maybe it is in Madeiros, who has fought at 170 at various points in his career, and even 185 and 205, and is a tough bastard. Just maybe makes it seem this way. But we kind of see this in some of the other fights that Sanchez has had, where it's just, he's not hurting people. That doesn't mean he can't win, because he does have a creative game. He does have a deep game. He can strike, he can grapple, he can grind it out. But it does leave him kind of, by default, ending up in the grinding game. And there are rather small windows of victory for that type of game, because if you get hurt at any point, if you get dropped, if you get staggered, if you end up in a tight spot, you're not necessarily bringing any flashy offense to kind of make up for that. It's kind of the John Fitch problem of, I don't necessarily know how you fix it, other than go back to 145, where you seem to be able to hurt people. But he's at 155, I assume for a reason, and 145 wasn't going great for Sanchez before he decided to make this change, because, you know, he did lose to Pitbull Ferrari and Mads Burnell, and I think he lost to Jeremy Kennedy. I think, was that not at 145? Was that at 155 maybe? That might have been his first foray. No, that was 145. So, yeah, he'd lost 3 straight. Granted, to not jokes, but to be overpowered by Jeremy Kennedy does suggest maybe that the problem at 145 is kind of similar to what he's facing at 155. It just, in a slightly different form, that it's a power and strength game type problem. Patchy Mix beat Kyoji Horiguchi. I do still have significant concerns about Patchy Nix because of his cardio. Now, when I say cardio, I don't mean that he gets exhausted and stops fighting or whatever, or even necessarily slows down. But by the third round of all of his fights, he seems to start getting sloppy and predictable. It's like when he gets tired, his form starts to break down. That's normal. That's anyone. If you've ever tried sparring or doing like a grappling King of the Hill style thing, where it's like two people start, the winner stays in, the winner stays in. If you've ever gone through that and you made it like, I don't know, 12 rounds or something, you'll note that your form is going to pot as you're getting tired. And that's Patchy Nix. And it also extends to his brain because he starts becoming pretty predictable. Now, he's still dangerous even at that because he's still a massive fighter for the division. Like, he's insanely large for the division. I believe 5'10". I want to say 5'10". 5'11". 5'11 is what he's listed at here. And that just is something you can't teach, I guess. You can't teach being big and being rangy and being able to be dangerous from anywhere and being venomous and having an amazing back take game. By the way, him and Rafael Stotts have to fight in this tournament. Please let that happen because they're both so interesting as scramblers and back takers that I want to see them go up against each other. So yeah, he got the win. He got the big win. I would say Horiguchi, when he could find his range and get engaged, was the better fighter, the deeper fighter, the more technical fighter. You know, I'm a sucker for that. That's why I picked him. But he couldn't find a comfortable zone to fight Nix, who just is such a physical specimen at 135. So scary. I could definitely see him winning this tournament. I think it's him or Stotts. That's my personal belief. We're going to talk about Stotts in a bit, but let's talk about Halima Mcfarland versus Justine Quiche, and I don't care who won this fight. There's a lot of conversation about who won this fight on social media right now, and I just don't care. I find both of them to be incredibly incomplete. Mcfarland's game, from striking to wrestling, doesn't have flow to it. It's just completely missing several connective pieces. And her wrestling, it tends to end up with her just smashing face first into the clinch without a tremendous amount of technique or a tremendous amount of hope of getting takedowns. And against anyone who has a reasonably well put together physical aspect to their game, which Quiche does, it gets kind of shut down, and she ends up having to outwork people who are just stronger and faster than her, and it doesn't really work. And that was this fight in a nutshell. And then on top of that, you have Quiche, who is so badly put together as a striker. I don't understand it because she has pedigree. She's worked with coaches that are good. I don't understand how she can be so inactive for large portions of the fight. How her combinations don't seem considered or thought out. They're kind of predictable. She's way too willing to throw just punches and kicks that don't really lead to anything. And that's why I thought Mcfarland would win. Quiche got the win, but I feel like both girls just really reinforced my negative feelings about them. So I don't know. How old is Quiche? Off the top of my head. She's been around for quite some time. She's 34. Yeah, okay, they're not. They're at the age, I think they're both 34. And they're just, they're what they're going to be. And that's frustrating. Not that their final product at 43, but like the final product that they are is frustrating. Rafael Stotts, Juan Archuleta, head kick knockout in the 3rd round. I had Archuleta up, and he was doing, I thought, pretty well. He's doing Archuleta things. Also good to see him shaving the head finally. You know, as a fellow brother of the smooth dome, I can relate. And, I mean, I said it in the breakdown of this fight, like, I really, really like Juan Archuleta as a fighter. It's just that he doesn't have tremendous amounts of power to make his game work without it being like very thin margins, because he's got so much hustle. He's a scrambler. He's got a well put together technical striking game. He's a very technical sound wrestler, but he can just get stuffed and he can just kind of be outgunned. And I think that was highlighted here. Like, he would be winning exchanges as they went deep, but he needed to go deep with them, whereas Stotts could hurt him, could make him back off, and also could get him down. Like, they both got each other down. Stotts gets the win. Stotts is my pick to win the tournament, but I am looking forward to a final between him and Patchy Nix. Patchy Mix, pardon me. I keep saying Patchy Nix and Mix also in the videos. It's Mix. It's Mix. It's M. And then we finalize it off with the main event, Cyborg versus Blenco. And I know there are 3 fights after this, but I have very little to say. The only fighter of the 6 that is sort of notable is Jordan Winsky, but Jordan Winsky fighting Ryan Dela Cruz is not interesting. But I guess he lost to Brian Moore, which kind of defeated his, or sent his Bellator stock plummeting, because they signed him off the win over Terry and Ware, and they were like, oh, this guy's going to be pretty good. And then he lost. And now they're kind of having to rebuild him again. And De La Cruz just isn't very good. But anyways, Cyborg versus Blenco. One, mad props to Blenco for being super tough, trying new things. Like, she was trying different things throughout the fight and doing whatever she could do to make this fight competitive. She just can't. And Cyborg was beating her up. She did have a puffy eye. Cyborg, by that I mean. So Blenco got some stuff in there and did some damage, but it's kind of how everything looks against Cyborg. She's going to beat you up. There's not really a lot of fighters in the world that I'm super intrigued to see what happens when Cyborg fights them. And that kind of brings me to the final, what I'm going to finalize on here is that the social media hot take after this fight is, oh, well, Cyborg really needs to re-sign with the UFC and fight Amanda Nunes again. Here's the thing. I mean, it's the thing that I couldn't explain to someone on Twitter, because he was a big Cyborg fan. And we thought the same thing, that she shouldn't re-sign with the UFC or whatever. But he didn't understand that what I was essentially advocating for was that had Cyborg really been a big numbers mover, the UFC probably would have just kept her. Because as much as Dana White didn't like her, he signed her while not liking her. He signed her after the Vanderlei Silva address, after making all kinds of PAD accusations against her, even though she's tested positive less times than a number of UFC fighters, including some of Dana's favorites, and saying that she would never get booked by the UFC. They did book her. And she did $360K on pay-per-view. That's the second highest I believe any woman has done. Like, only Ronda Rousey fights are higher than that as pay-per-view headliners. But the drop is extreme. And she's probably not really worth the risk. So, like, the UFC won't be re-signing her. And if they did, one, what will we really get out of it? Like, sure, you can do a rematch between her and Amanda Nunes, but what's after that? The UFC doesn't have a 145 division, really, so to speak. And if you don't believe me, realize that they don't have a ranking for the division. And I don't think they have any fighters that are unique to it. I think everyone who's fought at 145 and is on contract has fought at 135. So what are we doing? Cyborg is going to go in there and destroy anyone aside from Nunez. Well, not destroy. I mean, Holly Holm gave her a good fight. I imagine Jermaine Duramity could. Maybe Juliana Pena could do some things. But it's not going to be a super classic, intriguing fight. And, I mean, as long as she's on the outside, there's the, I guess, remote possibility you could get the Kayla Harrison fight, which is fresh meat and probably close to as interesting as the Nunez fight. And then, of course, there's part 2, which is the UFC treated her like absolute shit. And it's weird to see social media people seem to legitimately not know this. Like I don't think that they're trolling. Like they're asking, what do you mean they treated her poorly? But they take the answer and they accept it. There's not even like a Dana White sucking the taint going on when we're talking about this. It just seems like people don't remember that, like, they forced her to cut to 140 for no reason. You weren't going to create a 140 division, and no one thinks Cyborg can make 135 that doesn't have a vested interest in Cyborg making 135. If you're and then when they did make the 145 division, she wasn't in the title fight. It was Jermaine Duramity versus Holly Holm. So, like, the disrespect, the treatment, there's no reason she should go back there. And there's no really reason as fans that we should want her to go back there. Because if you're like, well, Dana White was just telling the truth the whole time, okay, fine. You don't want her to get paid by the UFC then. And if you're a Cyborg fan, okay, you get the Nunez fight, which is a big deal, I guess. But there's nothing after that. And she's not going to get paid. And with Bellator, she can do other stuff. It's kind of ironic with that being the famous quote from Dana White of, these guys are independent contractors. They can do whatever they want. And they clearly can't. But that's about it, really. It was an interesting round of cards. Definitely some eye-opening experiences. What do we have coming up next? Just like as a quick preview, we've got, I could do a PFL breakdown, but I don't watch them enough. And we got Font versus Chito Vera fight night card, which I really like some things on. Like, I think that fight, the headliner is going to be really good. I think Andre Fili versus Joe Anderson Brito, that's interesting. And I think Jared Gordon versus Grant Dawson's pretty interesting. But at the same time, we get Andrei Arlovsky versus Jake Collier, and Tristan Connolly still on a UFC card. I've met Tristan Connolly, and he's a weird dude. Just, I have no belief. And Gina Mazzani's on the card. Oh, that is not good. And Chase Sherman versus Romanov. That's a execution. I don't know. That's kind of lukewarm. What's going on in PFL? Is there anything that would make me do a podcast or a video about the PFL on this card? Not really. It's not a great sign when the fight that my eye is drawn to probably the most is Bubba Jenkins versus Kyle Bochniak. But that is the fight that my eye is drawn to the most. Wow. So there will be that prediction video. And if you want to ask me something, feel free to shout it out on Twitter or on the YouTube comments or on my Discord. Because there may be some time to fill next week. Or pardon me, later this week when I do that prediction video, because there's not a lot to talk about on those fights. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.